we've even seen the numbers, but probably somewhere between 50 and 75 miles of streets. We have 170, I believe 78 miles of streets. I'm getting off in Press's presentation, so I'll let him do that. But I think the committee, we started out small. We thought about $10 million and $20 million. $2 million a year doesn't even make a dent in what we have to do in this city. We have a lot of cleanup to do. I've been driving the streets and looking at the project restore. We have some wonderful houses that have been restored, and you can't look at them for the potholes in the streets and things like that. So this is something that I think will really, our citizens will embrace. We look back, and I don't think our citizens have voted against the bond proposal in a long, long time. Nobody can remember when. So I think this is something that the citizens know it's not going to impact their taxes. You can think of it by moving the current $2 million that we have in the street program over into the interest and sinking fund. So there's essentially no impact. And I don't know what else, Al or Cedric, do you guys want to add anything to this? We are unanimous in our recommendation of this proposal, by the way.
One quick question. You said the money and then take so much a year and so much next year, et cetera, according to what the workload would allow. Would you give all of that at the same interest rate, or would it be at the interest rate of that year?
I think it'll be at the interest when we sell the bonds, what it would be. But
so we would get total approval and then execute it by year basis.
Yeah, and execute it as soon as we could. I think Press has indicated maybe for the first $20 million, we'll let him tell you, but the first $20 million, it might take 18 months to use all that with the projects he has. But we want to sell the next tranche of bonds and begin work on that immediately. So the idea is to get this done and take advantage of low interest rates to the extent we can, and also the inflation that's undoubtedly going to happen with interest rate costs.
Okay.
So that's kind of what it is now. Or Cedric, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think we all did an awesome job. Everybody worked together on this project. Perez did an awesome job with his presentation and what he brought to the table. So just looking forward to everybody seeing the presentation of Perez.
And I think it's important to remember that streets are our number one driver of citizen complaint. Yeah, it's on. There we go. Streets continue to be the number one driver. As Brett and I know, being on the comprehensive plan development team, the surveys keep saying streets, streets, streets. And with our ability to go out with these and ask for this large of an authorization without a tax increase, I think the done before you can go out and sell your next set of bonds. So that's why it's multiple authorization, or multiple issues if we get a total authorization. So I hope the voters will embrace it, and if Preston is ready, he can come up and tell us all about it.
Good evening, good afternoon, so evening, yes. Anyway, I did put together a PowerPoint presentation on this, on what we discussed at the Transportation Subcommittee meetings. And to follow up what was said, was the cost of infrastructure is going up significantly. We went back and looked at from 2014. We just picked several items that are crucial to a road building, and one of them is concrete. We looked at pipe prices, and we looked at asphalt prices. And the dramatic, as you can see, is on this chart back here, from 2014 to 2020, we've had a 230% increase in concrete prices. And if you look at the projected line that will follow that, it's going to continue to rise. And we've seen that pretty much in the industry with everything else we're doing. Asphalt was around 18% per year increase. PVC pipe was running 12 to 14% a year. We don't see any indication that that's going to slow down, it may go down a little bit, but prices are increasing fairly significantly as there's more and more work to be done. We are competing with Metroplex.
There's a lot of work there, a lot of contractors there. They absorb a lot of the monies there, so. So that, I just wanted to give you a little graph showing how infrastructure costs are rising. The other thing is, I kind of revised this a little bit from our last meeting, but the total mileage in the city is about 180 center line miles. What we have figured out that total cost for residential streets run about $1 million a mile. Total cost for our collector roads is running about $3 million a mile. And this includes redoing the water, sewer, storm sewer drainage, either concrete, asphalt, sidewalk, driveways. And what I want to relate that to is what we're doing right now in Stonewall. We did a complete rebuild on that. We should get 50, 75 years service life out of that, if not more. We did a lot of geotech on it. This subgrade is good, firm. We don't see any reason why we should have any failure in that. We rebuilt the storm sewer so we can control the water, so we don't have any water intrusion in the road. But that's kind of where we're at, is with these numbers to do the collector roads. Now, recently, council approved, we've had the road assessment company out doing all the road assessments so we can put that into the paver program. And this was just a little slide we had showing about what it cost us to do infrastructure improvements on a per mile basis. Then I told you we worked into what we did. We did a roadway assessment plan. Laser camera went around and assessed all our streets. All that raw data is now being compiled. I think they have about another week or two of finishing all the raw data.
Well, they've already done the survey and everything?
Yes, sir. They've been here since the first week in January, and they said they got about another week. They're doing some rechecking of some streets that didn't pan out as quite good as they wanted it to, but they're checking their data now. So once we get all that data, we dump it into this program, which was the Corps of Engineers DOD program that tells you, based upon the condition of the road, what work needs to be done on it and where it would fall in your priority. And all this is predicated on what is known as a pavement condition index, a PCI. And what that does, it tells you what condition your road is in based upon alligator cracking, drainage, amount of traffic on the road and all. But historically, you can see, and these curves are pretty good even on a national basis. But you can see right here, when you get about year 10 or 12, once you start falling off that curve, you can see how fast your roads deteriorate. And that's what we're trying to do now is get to that we can do some rehab work on roads in this area to extend their life at a lot less cost than if you're down here waiting for the road to get to that age and that deterioration, you're spending sometimes 8 to 10 times the amount of money.
So is this all roads, or is this asphalt, or is this concrete? Or
This is an asphalt curve.
okay.
Okay, and I'll show you something next slide, but here's another slide. It says the same thing. It says, when your roads are good and when poor. You can see right here at about 14, 15 years the most, that's when you've already fallen off the curve. Your critical point is about a PCI around 70. So once you get to there, you got what, 15, another 3 or 4 more years, and your road just really goes downhill. So this is a fairly common index that used pretty much nationwide by pavement people and asphalt companies and public works people, how to come up with a pavement management program. And here's, Commissioner Money, what you said. This is asphalt. And to do rehab on asphalt, every 10 to 12 years or whatever, you're going to spend that much money. Here's concrete. So the initial cost of concrete is more than asphalt, but the service life is longer, and there's no rehabilitation or maintenance cost in it for a good many years. It's about 3 to 1. So that's what we look at. We looked at particularly the collector roads. You get a lot of traffic, a lot of truck traffic, putting those in concrete to get the 30 to 50-year service life out of them.
So if you took, sorry, I feel like I'm real loud here. If you took the road, and Jerry identified that reconstruction, I can see where you could take an asphalt road and turn it into a concrete, but you can't do a mill and overlay with concrete.
No, sir. But concrete doesn't require that. Usually what happens...
No, I mean, take an asphalt road, mill it down, and then lay concrete over it. You can't do that.
It's not recommended. It's been tried. Concrete is a flexible pavement. It's designed to move somewhat, where concrete is a rigid pavement. It's not designed to move. So you're kind of putting apples and oranges together when you try to do that.
Okay.
But out of this, we came up with our bond issue for $50 million. And in talking with our staff, we feel like the $20 million as the initial bond, we could get that spent in 18 months. It would be a task. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not, but we feel like we could get the $20 million spent in the 18 months. Okay. What I did based upon our other slide, our collector roads, and I'm just looking at a $50,000 level of it, okay, we got $3 million a mile for collector roads. Some are going to be less, some are going to be more, but we just took that average. We could do 13 miles of collector roads. Now, a lot of our collector roads are 1.2 miles, 1 mile, 1.7, stuff like that. So we would be, like O'Neill Street, Stanford Street. Those streets could be done in their entirety. So we're trying to do it on a mileage basis, but don't let it think that 1 mile is one road. I mean, it varies all over the place. Residential roads, we got 1 million a mile. So, but what we're trying to tell you is a mile correlates to about 10 city blocks. So it's not like one road is 1 mile. So to get a mile of road, we may be able to do 5 or 6 streets in a residential area. And we're looking at now to block those out, we may be able to do 8 or 10 streets for a mile. So I didn't want y'all to think that we're just doing one street as a mile and it's $1 million, but it's numerous streets.
So you would take such as a neighborhood and you would say, okay, we're going to redo those in that entire neighborhood, even though the total may be, you say 10 blocks.
Right.
In some neighborhoods, okay, so you use seven of those blocks.
That's correct.
So your cost would be associated, but it would hit that entire neighborhood. So it's not
Yeah.
like this street you guys suffer.
That's what we're looking at. We're looking at doing blocks of streets in residential areas that would kind of clean up the whole neighborhood.
And that would be driven by this assessment that they've come through and said, these are the streets
Yes, sir.
that need it worse, these are next. You would look at that and say, where does that fit within a neighborhood or an area?
That is correct. And so hopefully, next several months, we should have the raw data dump into Paver, start getting our data out of that. But this is an aggressive plan. I'll be the first to admit it. It is aggressive, but it can be done. And I think what we're trying to accomplish with this is like y'all said, the $2 million a year. I kind of feel like the mule chasing the carrot. I'm never going to catch that carrot. I'm going to work like hell to get there, but I'm never going to get there. By the time we spend $2 million, I've already got other streets deteriorating to the point that I got to spend money again. So I'm always chasing that. This gives us an opportunity to try to get ahead of some of this.
So if you, as Jerry identified, for pothole maintenance, outsource a company to do that, for your reconstruction and your mill overlay, you obviously would outsource that. that would be out for
Absolutely.
boards or for bids. Would you need to add additional inspectors to your group so that you can go and be sure that the guy is building it and doing it the way that it's supposed to be done?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
We don't need oops and have to redo it and then go to
Right.
lawsuits and stuff like that.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. We have one inspector now, and my director of engineering, he's doing inspection work. I've gone out and done some inspection work too, with not only just city work, we also inspect all the private work, all the private developers building subdivision. We have to inspect their work also. So we got a pretty healthy load, but I've sat down with my staff, we discussed this, and we feel like, yes, we could definitely use another inspector. There's no question about it. But we can handle this, we can get the work done for the first 20 million in the 18-month period.
Well, I don't want to get up and get moving on 20 million and say, gee, we really should get one more inspector or two more inspectors. You need to have in your plan, lay it out and explain it to the city manager so that it can get into the budget,
Yes, sir.
so that the job can be done the way that it should be, the way that we all want it to be, and that we don't have somebody out there that's cutting corners because we don't have an inspector checking them.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, and that's one of the things that we were going to talk about. We just now got our schedule for our, starting our budget hearing. So that was definitely some of the conversations we were going to have in this year's budget. So that's kind of my presentation tonight. I appreciate the time and the input from the Transportation Committee on this. I think those were very fruitful and useful meetings, and I think we got a lot of stuff done with it. So I want to thank y'all for that.
Al, you got comments?
Yeah, just one more quick point. Correct me if I heard you wrong in some of the prior meetings. With these going out in these issues of 20 million, 50, that will make us more competitive for the contractors that are going to the metro and everything else to draw them there. And may, in fact, if we're more competitive, get a better unit price, and this may actually.
That's correct. I mean, we're $2 million a year. It's, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad fee, but when you're competing against 15, 20, $30 million projects in the Metroplex, they're going to go there. They're going to go where the money is, but we will get better unit prices. And the more work you can give them, the more product they can do, more advantage it is for them to be here to do it.
So if you lay out your plan and we bring this to the voters on 1 May and they say, yay, barely, go forward, what's the time frame till you go forward?
We feel like with the paver information, we could probably get started within 30 to 60 days on some residential areas.
Now, but how would you have the bids in from the people? I mean, you
We're
wouldn't
going
go,
to bid, like we bid 50,000 tons of asphalt. You know, give me a price to do that, and it's going to be different streets all over the city.
yeah, I was thinking more the crews that are going to show up to actually do the mill or do the tear up of the roads.
That's one of the things that we want to do ahead of time between now and May. We're actually going to sit down with the major contractors that we deal with to get their input to it. So we can say, hey, this thing is approved in May. We want to hit the street running. You have the capability to do it. Do you have the manpower to do it? We're looking at, putting this out for contracts for bidding on this quantity of work. But that's one of the things we want to do is sit down with all our major contractors and make sure that they have the capability to do it.
So you can go get bids and stuff and negotiate with contractors without the bond or anything being approved.
Yes, we could tell them this is all predicated on the bond issue. If we don't get the bond, thank you for your work, but we're in the same boat. We're spending a good bit of time and energy on this to get to this stage, because with this schedule, we want to hit the ground running.
Bummer, how would we pay for something like that? How would we pay for him to go ahead and get contractors to bid on it and negotiate and tell him that award is dependent upon the approval of the voters in May? If he wants to go start working on it now, between now and May, where do we get the money to pay for that effort?
For the engineering piece of it?
For whatever he
What
would need
I think, Mr. Mayor, what we're talking about, this is basically staff time for us to put quantities together based on what we're looking at and come up with breakdown of quantities that we could sit down with the contractors. I don't, with a couple engineering firms we need to talk to about some of the major roads, the collector roads, we'd have to have some engineering done. But I think a lot of it is just gonna be our staff time sitting down with the contractor saying, okay, if we put out a bid for 50,000 tons of asphalt, can you hit the ground running? Can you provide 3 paving crews? Can you provide that to us?
Yeah. As
So
long
it's
as
just-
there's not design work involved, then we should be able to do it, no problem.
So it's just a matter of normal operation to do that negotiation, and I don't doubt that you guys can come up and say we need X number of tons of this and that and things like that. My worry is the length of time that it takes normally to go out and ask for competitive bids and get responses back. Now, do we have to go for competitive bids on something like this?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, we do.
So
We'll already have the quantities, scope, and they'll be familiar with it. So it's not like they're looking at it fresh for the first time. They'll be familiar with it. So when we put it out to bid, the ones, and any of them can come look at it ahead of time. We'll be,
But if you say, okay, I need 50,000 tons or 50 million tons or whatever it is of asphalt, and you can have it all, you still, when you send out your request for bid, you've got to give them a certain period of time
that's correct.
in order for them to evaluate it and
Right.
turn their bid in, and then we've got to go ahead and do the process.
That is correct.
So be sure that you put that kind of stuff in there. I don't want to
No,
try
I
and rush
understand.
things. Let's do it right first time.
And I think, Talia, if you can help me in it, like,
Twice, yeah.
I can't hear you, Talia.
I think we have to advertise for a minimum of 2 weeks on the bid itself. And then we take the bids, analyze them, and then bring them back to council for approval of a certain contract. In this case, it'll be multiple contractors. We probably have 2 or 3 contractors working on this bond issue at the same time. But like you said, I think it's 2 weeks minimum to advertise.
So basically what you're saying is doing all that prep work before it comes to budget, just on a grander scale.
That's correct.
Basically, it's the
Right.
process.
Exactly.
A lot more streets.
So
Grander scale.
the question I have, does that mean there will be parts of this that are just overlays or?
Some of the
Crack
residential
seal or-
street, yes, sir. Some of them, we're going to analyze if our water and sewer has already been reconstructed and replaced. We'll look at the drainage and maybe minimal drainage work and would take the geotech on them. If it recommends to come back and say, okay, all you need to do is mill and overlay this street, little drainage improvement here, we're good to go.
Okay, and what about, I noticed, and first of all, I didn't say this, great job committee, and I appreciate Press and Paul and everybody that worked on this, and I think this is a good program, and I hope that, we can explain to the voters how this is a good long-term investment in our community. It looks like by the time this program is fully kind of funded, operational at the end of 2024, our debt service on that portion, just on this, will be about 2.5 million. And my question is, where will money come from when we need to do things like just pothole repairs or normal maintenance, because that stuff's still going to come up?
I don't want to speak for the committee, but what we discussed was putting either additional funding into the streets budget for road repair, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 for routine road repair, emergency repair, anything that comes up. And maybe if we had to, if some of this bond money could be used for major street repair, like, I keep bringing this up, but when Lee Street, when the water main on that collapsed on us, I mean, have monies available to do stuff like that when it occurs. So we have addressed that issue. We agree with you, routine maintenance, pothole patching, intersection improvements will still be there. So we do need monies to have that, and I think we have discussed trying to allocate some monies for that process.
Okay.
That, and I guess Paul or Stephen's going to come up and describe that. This model assumes a 6% compounded appreciation of TAV. So that 2.5, or it's really, I think, 2.38, is probably compensated for in that appreciation of the taxes.
As far as the percentage of our budget.
Yeah, you catch up. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other question I have is, based on this life cycle, I mean, in general, we like to amortize things over the life of the thing that we're buying. And so when you're pouring a brand new concrete street that has, what looks like almost a 40-year life if it's built properly, then a 30-year bond, makes a lot of financial sense. If we were to, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, take this money and just fill potholes everywhere, then we would still have potholes 5 years later and all that money's gone. So how are we going to make sure we're prioritizing things based on, we don't want to run out of money at the end of 2024 and we're still paying for it for another 25 years on streets that, according to that cycle, are going to need significant reinvestment in 10 to 12 years.
We discussed that with our financial advisor, and I think he can answer your question if Press doesn't.
Okay.
Well, what we talked about was to make sure, this is a 30-year bond, to make sure we had parts or, I don't know, a percent of our project that had a 30-year service life. And the streets, like the major collectors, those will be concrete streets. They will have 30 plus, 50-year plus life cycle on it. So we would meet the intent of the bond issue. And I don't want to speak financially, so we have somebody a lot more experience in that than me on that, but that was my understanding of what was discussed
Yes.
in the meeting.
So a certain percentage of the money has to be spent on new concrete curb and gutter street
Exactly.
improvement, not just,
They'll address
Okay,
that in their
good.
presentation.
good, okay,
Yeah.
Have to have the life
gotcha.
A portion of it.
portion.
I'm not the first one to think of that.
Do we want Paul to come up and tell us about
Yeah.
numbers?
Yes, we'd like
Paul,
to.
you want to come up and,
It was to make sure that it was,
Steve?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mayor. Got a little presentation, but yes, just to answer Brent's question, did talk about that. The bonds are level debt. So every project doesn't have to last 30 years, but at least enough of it that the level debt makes sense. And that's not only good financial sense, as you point out, that's also a requirement of federal tax law. So tax attorneys will look at the projects and how many are in which category and look at what the estimated life is. And if there's a problem when we were looking through that and doing our diligence on the bond issue, we'll have to deal with it at the time. But typically on streets, if you're doing a high percentage of them or a large percentage for major concrete streets.
What's the percentage?
Well, if with level debt, you got like the last maybe 25% of it that's the last 7 years or 5 years. It has to just match that pretty much. But you're going to have a percentage of your debt paid off, a quarter in the first quarter of that time, and projects that are more like overlays or whatever type of projects aren't going to last that long, as long as you're matching it with the debt you're paying.
Okay.
Let's see. Mayor, I think one of the questions that came up as we were listening was spending the money and issuing the debt. I think the one thing that we were talking to Summer about was we need to be able to spend the money in 2 years also to comply with federal tax law. So we try to issue the right amount of bonds that the city can say that they highly anticipate that they can spend it within 2 years. So if we do 18 months, if there's any kind of delay because of rain, we can still get that money pretty much spent in 2 years. So that's one thing that's dictating the size of the bonds as to how much can actually be spent.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
I think they have a presentation they're going to show you, though, about how.
Okay, so we do, thank you. So we did a presentation for $50 million in debt. I think at our last workshop, we looked at a number of different scenarios with the group we were talking to, and we kind of focused on it between $45 and $50 million as being what they wanted us to look at that made sense. When running our numbers, we do include the $4.5 million that was already passed by the voters, so that's in all of our numbers. And what we were looking at before was a scenario where how much debt service should we put into our program along with a certain amount of new money. In this particular scenario, the aggregate annual debt service for the new debt is $2.3 million by the time it's all issued. And so that was the kind of the driving force. And so the $50 million is based on a total debt service of $2.38 million per year. And we did run some tax scenarios with the growth rate of 6% through 2026. And then after that, we did a growth rate of 2.5% for 4 years. At that point, we did a neutral tax rate, but you're so far down the road at that point, it's really inconsequential of how much you do. So for the interest rates that we used, we did rates as of January 22nd. We added 25 basis points. And then we added another 25 basis points for each year thereafter. So we've assumed the interest rates go up 25 basis points for the first issue, another 25 for the second, and then a final 25 for the third. We assumed a summer issuance in 2022 of $20 million, a 2023 bond issue of $15 million, and a 2024 issue of $15 million. And again, that's on top of the $4.5 million that we'll issue later this year. So the next page gets us to a graph that we did of what all this looks like. And I know this is pretty busy, but the blue line that's coming down, the solid blue line, that's your INS tax rate as we project it. And it is going to be coming down after 2024, even if we do this debt, because your existing debt's falling off pretty rapidly. So as a city, in not too distant future, you have a lot of capacity within your tax rate. And one thing we talked about at the last workshop was, if I'm looking at a new client, I'm looking at it only on paper without driving into a city or school, and if their tax rate's below about 20 or 25 cents, I can pretty much tell you they've got infrastructure problems. So to me, it would not make sense for Greenville to let the tax rate continue to fall over the next 10 years, because you're going to have infrastructure that needs repaired, and you're going to need to sell bonds, and you're going to need to vote bonds, and you're going to need to keep your infrastructure up. So even though we're showing the debt falling off pretty dramatically in this graph, and the tax rate coming down pretty dramatically, I would say that your constituents are probably going to be asking you to sell more debt for various projects for the general fund over those next, the next decade or so. And so, but you can still see that the tax rate will be where it is at the most and continue to fall. And what we'll probably do if we move into this, if the election passes, is talk about a strategy of where do we keep the tax rate so we keep it up at 20 cents or so by structuring the debt that way, so that just increases your capacity 5, 10 years out for whoever's on the council at that time. We know the city will have needs. However, for this particular scenario, we ran the debt all level. As you can see here, the second to the left column is our estimate of the taxable assessed valuation. And as you can see, we grew it at 6% per year. So it goes from $2.35 billion in 2021. And then in 2026, it's up to $3.153 billion. We slow down the growth after that so that we top out at an assessed valuation of $3.48 billion. Knowing what's going on at the city, in the region, and looking at your recent tax rate growth, we think that these are pretty reasonable assumptions. We have some information about in a couple of slides, I'll show you what your historical tax rate growth has been. But then if you look at your total tax-supported debt service is the fourth column over, and it starts at the 5.2 million, and then in 2023 it drops to 3.3 million, then to 2.9 million, and then eventually in 2031 it goes down to 700,000. So your existing debt, as it is right now, is falling off pretty dramatically. We do know we're going to sell bonds for the $4.5 million referendum that was just passed, and we have that in column under 2020 referendum, and that is 30-year level debt. And then you see the 3 new issues that we're talking about for a proposed referendum in 2021, and you can see that in the Series 2022, we do have, in 23, we do have larger principal payments that first year to keep the tax rate from just dropping really quickly than you having a new project come up in a few years and have to raise it right back. So we are anticipating that over the next, 5 or 10 years, you are going to have more general obligation debt needs when we're doing that. So we're not just letting the tax rate fall down, only to have somebody else have to bring it right back up for a future bond election. And that's something we can talk about over time when we go into these individually. We haven't done that much of that, but we have done a little bit of structuring here on those first 2 bond issues. Third bond issue is level debt service, the Series 2024. So I'm going to stop right there. Tons of numbers, tons of graphs. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. All right, so this is really, we're kind of getting into the backup. We have, for that first bond issue, we've assumed 2.48% interest rate for 30-year, then 2.71% 30-year debt, and finally 2.99% for that last bond issue. We don't know if rates are going up. We don't know where they're going to be, but we felt like we should put a little bit of conservative interest rates in the model just so we can, hopefully be accurate with it, or at least set us up where we could potentially have better rates. Now, I talked about work. So this is just the sources and uses for each one of these. It just shows that we've included a little bit for bond issuance costs in each bond issue. So there's actually a little bit less for construction. And so and our estimates are usually pretty high on our issuance costs as well. Well, I talked about our assessed valuation assumption. This is a historical growth in Greenville's assessed valuation. It really wasn't growing a lot until 2014, where it grew and then fell. I'm not sure what that was all about, but it's grown starting in 2016. You see 10%, 11%, 7.6%, 8%, 9.7%, 8.4% in 2021. we use 6% for the next few years. We think that's conservative. This next tax year is the year that there could be some values not go up as much, or maybe because of the COVID, it will show up on January 1 of this year if there's any values in properties that went down. Probably enough new property growth in the city to make up for all of that, but we will know here in a couple of months. And then just we have, for your reference, just the election calendar for May of 2021, knowing that if you do want to call this election, you'll have to do it before February the 12th. So, Mayor?
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. At this time, then we will go from here, and we're going to go into executive session, and we'll go in the other room.
The recipe for great food is simple. Make it fresh. Wings to go in Greenville, where every order is a custom order made with fresh ingredients. Wings to go, 7818 Wesley Street in Greenville. Simply great wings.
Need a part for the right price? Look for that red and blue sign. Henley Auto Supply at 1510 Stonewall. Over 800,000 CarQuest parts to choose from. Domestic, European, and Asian parts. Henley Auto Supply at 903-455-1969. 455-1969. Henley Auto Supply has the right part to keep your vehicle running. And backed by the best hometown service. Henley Auto Supply. Great people, great products, great prices. Henley Auto Supply and CarQuest.